So, like I said, welcome to howtolicenseyourmusic.com's first live webinar presentation. We're really excited to do this. We're going to talk about the topic of music production today, and specifically music production as it relates to licensing music, which is a little bit different than music production in general. We're going to go about an hour. Towards the end, we will try to answer some of your questions. Like I said, this is the first time Gary and I have done this, so we're kind of new to Google Hangouts. We'll try to field some questions, but we're going to go about an hour. We will be talking about a new music production workshop that Gary and I are launching on August 1st. It's a 30-day workshop where you'll work one-on-one with Gary, and we will tell you all about that at the end of this presentation. So stay through for the whole thing if you can. So music production, it's vital to getting your tracks licensed. I would say it's probably the most important component of licensing your music. I really break licensing down into three separate components. One is your songwriting, so obviously the songs you write and the lyrics you write and the songs that you're presenting. The second component is music production, how you produce those tracks, how you arrange your tracks, how you mix your tracks, everything related to music production. It's really, really important that this is done up to sort of a broadcast professional quality. And then the third component is your marketing, your ability to present your songs to people that work in this business. During this webinar, we're going to focus on component number 2, on the production of your tracks. It's so vital. I've stressed this for the last couple of years in my blog posts and videos that, if you don't produce your tracks sort of up to speed, if your tracks aren't produced well, you're really not even going to have a chance to license your music. If the production doesn't sound right, supervisors just won't listen. It's really that simple. So you need to figure this component out. Someone asked me, I was working with a client recently, and they asked me, like, if I want to license my music, what should I look for in a producer that I work with? And the way I answered that question was, I would look for a producer that has a track record of working with artists that are licensing their music. Gary Gray is one of those producers. We've worked together for the last 5 years now, and over the last 3 years, we've created 2 courses. Gary has worked with dozens of students at this point and has helped quite a few actually go on to land real world licensing deals. One of his recent clients was just hired as the full-time composer for A&E. We're going to talk about that particular student. Gary, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for doing this with me, Gary. Really appreciate you coming on. Let's go ahead and start, Gary. So the first question that I have for you is, can you give us a brief background of how you came up with this particular curriculum for the Music Production Fundamentals course? I know Eddie Gray, who I recently interviewed for my podcast, is one of our students who has gone through this workshop with you personally. What about this workshop has made it so successful, do you think?
Good question. I would think one of the main things is I've been able to beta test it, and I've been able to use this curriculum with students because I have students all around the world. I do Skype lessons, and I do basically remote computer technology, whereby I can actually go in, and whether they're working in Logic or Pro Tools or Cubase or Ableton, I actually go in and I mix right on their computer as if I'm there with them and they're looking over my shoulder. So when I've been testing this curriculum, it's been one-on-one, close quarters with students, addressing their confusions and addressing their frustrations and what they're running into, their barriers. And so I've been able to compile kind of a focused list of those things: confusions, barriers, things that they're frustrated about. And the more I did it, the more I found that there were definite common denominators. And as I addressed those common denominators, the students started having really good success. One sort of homework assignment, you could say, I did with Eddie Gray, who you interviewed on your podcast, as you said. He he said to me, he said, I'm really excited. I have an opportunity coming up where I can actually do a submission for a TV composer job. And I was like, wow, that's good. That's much nicer than just getting a song licensed. So he said, is that something we can work on? I said, absolutely. So I helped him put together the submission package for that. And he actually got the job. He was up against several, and then one other guy who had some experience in the industry, and Eddie didn't have any experience, and he got the job. So by using this curriculum, I found that I was having some really good success with students. And like, for instance, and another thing I pulled from to answer your question is from my own experience personally, because licensing my own music, I started at the bottom. I pretty much got nowhere and learned very little for about a year until two things happened. And one of those things is that I found howtolicenseyourmusic.com, and I found you. So I found Aaron Davison, howtolicenseyourmusic.com, and thank God I did, because there's, so much for me as a producer and making the music. There are like tutorials, for years on YouTube about producing music, but I couldn't find anything for licensing. So the one thing I found in you is a clear-cut path and, some stable points to hang on to that I could take baby steps and then bigger steps for licensing. And then the second thing was I started to collaborate with music supervisors and publishers in the studio. This is my studio right here, by the way, my home studio. Welcome. I'm here. I'm about an hour south of Hollywood. And so collaborating for me, I'm very lucky because I'm in the mecca of music here in Los Angeles. And so I was able to collaborate with music supervisors and publishers in the studio here. Like one of the first I worked with was Jody Friedman from HD Music Now. You can look him up. Great person. And he's a publisher and does music supervision. And so Jody came over because he's a musician, and every year he goes to Nashville, and he's big on acoustic Americana type of music. And so he came over and said, "Hey, I want to do a dance track," because he works in all styles, and I want to submit it. You want to collaborate with me? I said, "Yeah." So that was the beginning of something that was an amazing experience for me, which was to find out what publishers and supervisors needed by working with them in the studio. So talk about a resource, talk about having your finger on the pulse. It's like it was right there with me. And so he would say, no, don't do this, do that. And I'd say, well, why? He goes, because that's what the company wants. And he look at me like, don't you know? And I'm like, no, I don't know. This is awesome. And so I'd start asking him a lot of questions. So that was the second thing that I did. And that's basically how I came up with this curriculum. And it's been just it's amazing to watch students succeed. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. No, that's really cool to hear. I like one of the things I know that you talk a lot about, Gary, is asking the right questions. Like you need to know the right questions in order to get the right answers. What, in your opinion, what do you think the most important question a person can ask when it comes to achieving consistent success with music production, specifically related to licensing? What should people be looking for?
Well, that in itself is a good question. So it's an excellent question. The question that people should be asking, I think, is what is a music producer? So here we are on this, this webinar. We're going to be going over some very specific points on music production as it relates to getting your music licensed. And so we're talking music production. So really the first question and the most key question to ask, and once I asked this, I was able to actually start taking off on my career, is what is a music producer when it comes to licensing? So a music producer, when it comes to licensing, has two hats that he wears. So the obvious one that we all know about is the hat of going into the studio, choosing musicians. Here's what a music producer is in the studio. They're basically a person that gathers resources, organizes those resources, and then directs activities to completion. So in the studio, you're gathering, musicians, and if you're doing it all yourself, as some of us do, I do a lot of gigs where I'm blessed with, being able to play lots of instruments and stuff. So sometimes I can play all the instruments myself. But whether it's yourself or other instruments, you have to gather that together, organize it up, and then get it done. So that's a music producer in the studio. Now with licensing, and here's one of the things I found with my students, with many of them around the world, is that they actually did okay. They did okay on wearing the hat of music producer in the studio. Whether their tracks were up to standards yet or not, they were, taking it seriously, being very responsible, you know, doing their homework, working at it very hard. And so there they were. They they basically were improving more and more and more. And some of them got quite good, really good. I mean, up to the point where they were just ready to go and get their stuff, like into good paying jobs. And then I saw like some of the students not doing so well. And then I asked them, how how much are you applying yourself with how to license your music.com with all the things that Aaron is teaching you? And that is so vital. The other part of your hat, which is that you have to network and you have to build your pipelines. So that's one of the things that I want to go over, which is splitting your time. And I would say a successful percentage would be between 80% in the studio and 20% networking. Or if you can get it up to this, 50% in the studio, 50% networking is a great ratio where you'll find, I think, that your music licensing career will really take off. So I was like 97% in the studio and 3% networking. And that's what I found was happening with my students. And now here's why it's so vital to the quality of your tracks. Now, what I'm talking about right now has everything to do with the quality of your tracks. So follow this. So I started forcing myself, and this was because of Aaron, because of you. I started forcing myself to take the, hour to half hour to hour, depending on traffic here, up to Hollywood and get up there. I was going to Hollywood, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, and I started networking with people I know. I'm right here. And so I started networking with them. And what happened was, as I was sitting there, we were having lunch or having meetings or just hanging out, and I started to get a pipeline. You have to develop a pipeline, meaning someplace for your music to go. We can sit here all year and record, 100 songs. You've got to put it somewhere. Well, while you're developing that networking and pipeline, guess what happens? You're going to get feedback on your tracks, because what do we do when we go for meetings and we're songwriters? Listen to this, check this out, listen to this. That's what we do. We're excited about it. Those people we're having meetings with are going to make comments. They're going to make faces. They're going to, have something to say. You're going to get feedback. And that is very, very vital to your music production and the quality of your work. So I would get these comments from people and they'd go, I'd play them 3 tracks and they'd go, no, those 2 are not going to work. This one, and they'd make some positive comment about it. But you better fix this thing, and I'd say, interesting. So when I went back into the studio and I started working in the studio, I had a completely different viewpoint about what I was doing. I was no longer hold off from the rest of the world. I was now engaged with people that hopefully were going to take my music and possibly get it licensed. And I was interacting with them. So then I'd send them an email. I'd say, hey, I fixed that thing you talked about. What do you think about this track now? And they're going, yeah, it's better, but ABC. And I go, And I go, wow, this is interesting. This takes interaction. This is a human activity, what we do. So that's a key thing I wanted to go over. In the question I said that's key to ask is, what is a music producer when it comes to licensing? A music producer when it comes to licensing is one who hones your skill in the studio, gets better and better, and who also continues to network and get feedback with potential people involved in your pipeline. As you do that more and more and develop your network and your pipeline and your relationships, the quality of your tracks just goes up. It will just automatically go up because it's a form of communication. It's now a currency of conversation, back and forth, back and forth. And so that's, I think, the most important question to ask of yourself is, how much of those two hats am I wearing as a music supervisor? Because I'm not just making an EP. I'm not making an album. I'm not just putting out a single. I want to get my music licensed. I want to get it out into the world. So does that answer your question, Aaron?
Absolutely. Can you, I'm curious though, in listening to you talk, can we sort of hone in on some specific things production wise that songwriters and producers should be aware of, in particular when it comes to licensing? Like for example, Eddie Gray, who like essentially has attributed working with you to being hired at A&E as a full-time composer, which is amazing. What did you guys work on? Like, what about his production was lacking, and how did you help him kind of get to the next level? I know it's a really big topic, and our new course is like 8 hours long, so it's sort of hard to condense down to like a 5-minute answer. But can you talk about some things in general that people should really be aware of when it comes to their music production for licensing?
Yes. No, great question. So I have some very specific answers there. And this, I think, also will cover common denominator. And hopefully a lot of you viewers will relate to this. So with Eddie, one of the things that we addressed was, like, he would send me his tracks at first. And they were, he's an incredibly talented composer and he has a lot of natural talent. So he'd send me his tracks and they'd be like, oh man, they're like almost there, and he had no idea what was almost there, what was there. So he had no idea what to listen for. So that's one of the things that I go over with him, what to listen for. And in order to know what to listen for, you have to know how to listen to your tracks. So here's the first thing I went over with Eddie. While he was making his recordings, he would be, and I do this all the time, and I think everyone who makes recordings, does this same thing. You're listening to your track and then you stop and you go, oh, right there. I've got to fix that guitar part. I've got to fix that synth part. Or I want to create this. I want to do something with that section right there. So you set up your left and right locator in a loop and you start working on that part of your music. And here's what happens. And this is a common denominator that will really, if you can do this, it will raise the quality of your tracks right now and give you a better shot at getting licensed. So this is something you can do immediately. So let's say you're fixing a synth part and you just don't like it and it's too muddy and you want it brighter and you want a different notes. And so you're looping and you're recording and you're listening and you're looping and you're recording. And here's what happens. If you constantly loop, let's say 4 bars of your track, and you perfect those 4 bars and it sounds awesome. And you go, oh man, it's like, look what time it is. It's like, an hour passed and I got to go with the kids and the wife and whatever, you have your life to do. And you go, wow. And you're so happy because you got those 4 measures and that synth part to sound awesome. Well, here's what happens. You come back the next day and you play the song from the beginning and you get to that 4 bars and it sounds like crap. And you're like, what did I open the right file? And you're like, why does it sound like that? And here's why it sounds like that. There's a discipline and a patience that goes along with creating good quality work that will get licensed. And believe it or not, even though it seems like it takes longer, this is the fastest way for you to get great quality tracks. It's the tortoise and the hare. Okay. So you're listening to those 4 bars and you need to, I know you need to, I need to, to get them up to a certain point. Once you get it up to a certain point, stop the loop and extend it. Go back 8 bars this way and 8 bars that way. What's interesting is people will extend it before the section they're working on to see how things flow up to there, but they won't see how things flow after there. So even when they improve this point, they may not improve it on both ends of the spectrum. It takes patience and it takes time, and you might feel frustrated to have to sit there and listen to your song for 8 bars or 16 bars up until the point where you're testing it out, and then listen longer to see it. But if you do that, you're going to be a musician. You're going to be working on music. You're going to be employing passion. You're going to be employing emotion. You're going to be having fun with your music, in terms of musically, rather than being this technician that's fixing this thing within the 4 bars. And it will flow. You'll go, oh my God, it's like way too loud, and you didn't hear that when you were in your loop. And here's a point that I want to bring up about this also. The mind, which is, the mind is so important, in this whole game. And that's why I call it music production fundamentals, with mental in capital letters. The mind, when you work on a loop, will set up your music in a way where that becomes like this little song. And I bet you guys can relate to this. You're looping this thing over and over and over. And after a while, some of these loops sound pretty cool. And you're going like, wow, I should throw this song away. And I should work on this, like this loop. I should just extend this loop. This sounds awesome. And so you start to actually get into this thing, become familiar with the loop, and you start producing for the loop. So the loop sounds good rather than for your song. So that was the first thing that I went over with Eddie. When I went over that with Eddie, he was like, oh man, he was laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing when I told him that. Kind of like, whenever you touch upon a truth that you go, God, yeah, totally. That makes total sense. But it's something that people won't just tend to listen in a longer sections, because it takes patience, it takes discipline. And patience and discipline are very important when you're going to be producing and engineering music for licensing. Your attention to detail really has to up. And that was the second thing. So I have very specific, a few more points, Aaron. Is this answering your question? Because I have a couple more points on production.
Yeah, no, this is good. Keep going. This makes perfect sense.
Okay, good. So that was the first thing we tackled. By just tackling that one thing, he sent me his tracks, that we were working on for his lessons the next week. And there was a remarkable improvement. I mean, remarkable. So that's definitely something I know. And it's not just with Eddie. I have students, in, Australia and Germany and almost every continent now, as I said, where I'm doing remote computer work with them and I'm helping them mix their song. They're looking over my shoulder. Then I have them do it and I look over their shoulder. And so that was a remarkable difference. The next thing is that I had him, and this depends on where you're at in your career and with your studies. Eddie he is incredibly talented, like a natural talent, in terms of even theory. Like I thought he knew a lot of theory because I was listening to his compositions, and he said, Gary, to be honest with you, I really need to brush up on it. So here's another thing that I went over with him, which I think all of you can relate to. And that is, if you go to a website called Muglinworks, muglinworks.com, Mugglin, so it's Mugglin, muglinworks.com. I searched for, I don't know, like 8 months to find something online that I could trust and use for myself and for students, for music theory that would help them with licensing their songs. And I found this brilliant website. I love this website for myself and for students. Whether you're, advanced at all or brand new, this website will help your productions big time. Because here's the next thing I went over with Eddie, which is there's a tool in your toolbox as a producer and an engineer that many people don't consider a tool. And some people shun it as a tool. They stay away from it on purpose. And it's really sad. And that tool is a working knowledge of music theory. If you have a working knowledge, I'm not saying you have to be a master's degree. I'm just saying a working knowledge. If you have a working knowledge of music theory, the quality of your productions for music licensing will remarkably improve. And it doesn't take a long time to get a working knowledge of music theory. And with this website, muglinworks.com, you can really accelerate, your studies and cut out months and months, of time out of the equation. So what I did was I worked on Eddie and with him on this. And what I did was we went to the chord maps. It's called chord maps on MuglinWorks. And it basically, in a nutshell, does this. Here's how I define music theory for music licensing. When you know music theory and you use it smartly, what you're doing is you're employing common denominator sounds that give people chills and heal people and create great emotions. So for people that say, I don't need to know music theory because I'm going to get in this box, and because I hear this a lot, I don't want to know music theory because it's going to make me follow these certain rules and my music is not going to sound as good. And I want to create, I want to, really, be creative and go outside the box. And I say to them, well, consider this. If music theory is an organized compilation of those things that help you create chills in people and heal them and make them feel emotions, would you be interested in checking that out? And they're like, yeah, I'll check that out. Okay. Let me check it out. And so when I get my students, even the ones that just dig their heels in, that don't want it, once we get going, especially with muglinworks.com, they're just like loving it. I mean, and they're getting placements, whereas before they were not getting placements. So to neglect this area is not smart. It's not a smart thing. So with Eddie, he dove in there like a sponge, and he soaked it up, and we started working on it, and he started working on a weekly basis, and he started progressing through MuglinWorks. They have a step-by-step thing, and he really, really improved his productions. And just a little more specifics on that is, like chord voicings and how to create a melody and construct a melody, how to create tension and release within your recordings is really important. And it's something that music supervisors and publishers will really react to. They won't say, oh, you use tension and release, but if you start learning these tools and you know what tension and release is and how to create them in a pleasing way, in an emotional way with your recordings, which has to do with your arrangements and your composition, this whole tension and release tool, I go over that in detail in these workshops. That creates a reaction in music supervisors and publishers. Absolutely. That gets placements. Absolutely. So those are two tools that I used with Eddie. I mean, I could list more, Aaron. It really depends. I guess I don't know how much time we have left, or what you'd like to
cover. No, that's good. I just wanted to sort of give people an idea of specifically what you work on with your students. I know it's a big topic. Let's do this. I want to get into one more subject, sort of a technical part of production and licensing. After this question, what I'd like to do is open up questions, maybe take a few questions from people listening, and then we'll tell them about the workshop. But before we do that, I wanted to talk about stem files and the importance of having stem files sort of ready to go to supervisors. Can you tell us about your experience with stem files and how important it is to have those?
Absolutely. So stem files, let's see if I can do a little screen share here. Do you see those, Aaron?
Yes.
Okay, good. So on your screen, these are a list of stem files. Here's the definition of a stem file. And before I even get into it in detail, I'm going to show you how today's music licensing world interacts with stem files and how it's important today. So a stem file is breaking down your mix into groupings, and each of those groupings what you'll do is you'll export a stereo wave file of that grouping. So let's take a look at this example. Here's one example of stem file categories for music licensing. This particular example is from Megatracks, a job that I was just asked to produce a 12-song exclusive paid publishing deal for Megatracks for their prestigious distillery series. And so this was the breakdown of stem files that Megatracks asked me to produce in my submission to them. And it's not until I could, submit these, that's when I get paid, when they get the stem files. So number one, drums, percussion, and loops. And that's the first grouping. Number two, bass. 3, rhythm keyboards. 4, rhythm guitars. 5, melody, lead, and solos. Those are of instruments. 6 is lead vocals, if there's any lead vocals on there. And then there's a 6A that was added later because I asked them, should I make a separate one for background vocals? And they said yes. So we added a 6A, background vocals. And then 7 is strings. 8 is any brass. 9 is woodwinds. 10 is synthesizer and pads. And 11 is sound design and effects, special effects. So again, a stem file is a grouping of instruments or voices that contains only that item. And here's what's key. It contains also any and all effects for that stem in that stem only. So when you're creating these stem files, let's say you have drums, percussion, and loops. Well, for those of you who are, technically oriented with mixing already, you'll understand when I say the term send return effects and when I say the term insert effects. For those of you who are new, these items are actually, they're taught in a confusing manner, but I break them down in a very, very, very simple way in the workshop. So you'll be able to follow with me, but just follow for now, which is many of you that are listening, I know exactly what I'm talking about. So send return effects means, you're sending the signal from one track to another track that contains something like a reverb plugin on it. And because it's send return, it can be shared. That reverb is like a community reverb, which can be shared by several tracks, which is good because it can, for two reasons. Musically, it can make your music sound like it's all in the same room if several instruments are going to the same reverb. Makes sense. And the other reason that it's good is because if any of you are lacking in CPU, which happens because these, programs like Cubase, Pro Tools, Ableton, Logic, they're like hungry, man, for computer power. So sometimes you start mixing tracks, adding plugins, and the thing starts smoking and sputtering. And so in order to save CPU on your computer, you can also use these send return effects like a reverb, because instead of putting a reverb on every track, you just put one up and then you send the signal from several tracks and it shares that one effect. So in stem files, let's say you have a mix there and you didn't know anything about these stem files and you're making a single for your EP. And so you found this reverb that's awesome. So you send your drums to it. You send your keyboards to that reverb. You send your lead vocals to that reverb. You send your synthesizer to that reverb, and it sounds awesome. Your mix sounds great, and it will. It'll sound great. But you can't do that for licensing. So, and that's one of the reasons why I love doing what I'm doing, and I love working with Aaron, because I've been able to really kind of codify and organize the approach to engineering and producing for licensing. And here's one of the key things that you're learning right now, which is when you set up your send return effects, set them up so that you have one, let's say reverb. Let's just talk about reverb. You have one reverb for your drums, and any of the drums, like snare drum, tom-toms, cymbals, or whatever. If you want to put a send return reverb on those, that's fine. You can send them all to that track, that send return track. But don't send your keyboards to that same reverb. So mark that drum reverb track as exactly as that, drum reverb. Then your keyboards, if you have a bunch of keyboard tracks and you want them to have reverbs, and this goes, by the way, not just for reverbs, I'm using it as an example, but for anything, you know, when you set up send returns for reverbs, for delays, for compression, what's called parallel compression, which I also go over, which is a key tool. There's, you know, you can set up any plugin as a send return. So the bottom line is this, and I can go into the details, you know, on the workshop, but the bottom line is to keep the effects for that stem contained in that stem and not shared. If you do it wrong, here's what happens, and you can get rejected for licensing. You know, they get the lead vocal stem and they start playing it to test it, because they'll test your stems, and you're playing the lead vocal stem, and all of a sudden you hear drum reverb in the lead vocals, and that's what can go wrong. So you don't want that. Now I'm going to show you something else here, which is, because that particular one that we just looked at, I'm going to share another thing with you on the screen here. What I just showed you was for this. Let me get it up for you. Do you see that, Aaron? It says Megatracks.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Those stems that I just showed you was for a job for the Track Distillery series, which Megatracks sells. And what they did was they do something very unique in the industry. They sell to film production companies like Warner Brothers, Fox, you know, major companies, and anyone really. They sell this package of your mix and your stem files. So in this case, you notice there were 11, and that was for something that was a brilliant campaign thought up by Megatracks. And I mean, they're a very prestigious company. Like one of the other albums that was in the group that I did for Megatracks produced it at Abbey Road with the London Symphony Orchestra. So this is like, you know, top line stuff. So that was 11 stem files. Okay. Now let's take a look at something maybe a little bit more realistic that you might be looking at, you know, in your, for the viewers that are out there, on a typical job that you might be asked for stem files. So here we're going to look at this. This is a, in fact, Aaron and I just had a track that Aaron played guitar on and helped write, and I helped write. And do you see this one, Aaron, 1 through 4?
Yeah. A&E stem file 1 through 4. Yep.
Good. So Aaron and I just, we worked on a track together that got accepted for a TV show on A&E. And A&E asked for 4 stem files. So the one you saw before was 11. That was a special thing where they sell your stem files. A&E asked for 4 stem files. 1, percussion drums. 2, guitars, including bass. 3, piano/synths. And 4, strings/pads. Now, you know, it seems like, well, this would be a lot easier to do because it's 4 stems versus 11. But you know what's very interesting about this whole music licensing thing when you're producing tracks is that it's actually sometimes harder to figure out what to put in 4 stem files than it is to put in 11. Because before, if you noticed, we had like specific keyboards and specific this, and bass was separate and specific that. Well, when you're putting together stem files and you're creating your template for your sessions, which I'll show you, I can show you how to do that too. There's a really cool thing that I can show you on the workshop, which is how to set up templates for music licensing. Saves you so much time, and it gives you a much more freedom to just create and not have to worry about all the technical points. So getting back to A&E stem files, percussion and drums went on number 1, guitars including bass 2, 3 piano synths, 4 strings pads. Well, I had this one special effects track that I made because they asked me for this EDM track, so I made this EDM track. You know, it was kind of like a hybrid. It was like orchestral and EDM, and I had this white noise thing that was kind of going, and I'm like, and that's on one of my tracks. And I'm like, what the hell do I? There's no stem for that. Like on the other one, it said special effects. Easy, I stick it in there. I'm like, well, it's kind of a synthesizer sound, but it sounds like drums. So bottom line is you're going to have to make calls. You're going to have to make a decision, and you're dealing with an industry that is not standardized. There isn't this one like car wash that you run everything through, and you know it's always the same for every company. Unfortunately, it's not. But the good news is it's similar. What you're looking at on your screen right now is similar to different companies that you'll be working with. One of the biggest differences I can tell you is the bass. So where it says including bass, other companies will ask for that separately, which to me that makes sense.
Gary,
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think there's a third person whose mic is on. I'm not sure if you can see that on your end.
Oh,
it looks like someone
I thought I heard something over there. Let's take a look. Let's see. Yeah, because I can go in and see whose mic is on, if any.
So while you're doing that, Gary, so like the point that I wanted to sort of make to everybody is that for a long time now we've been saying when you present your tracks to licensing opportunities, you need to have the regular mix of the track and an instrumental version, and then WAV files and MP3s depending on who you're working with. But now sort of the new trend we're seeing is that more and more supervisors are actually asking for stem files. So it's a relatively new thing over the last year or so that we're seeing come up so frequently that it's really probably something you should, like if you're using an outside producer, you really need to have access to these for potential licensing opportunities. It doesn't come up 100% of the time, but it comes up a lot. It comes up very frequently. So something we wanted to bring up today. Did you figure out who else's mic was on? Do you have a way to mute that, Gary?
Actually, I don't. If anyone out there has your mic on, if you could mute it, that would be good. I do hear somebody's out there, so that would be appreciated. If you have your microphone, there's a little icon of a microphone. Just
actually, it lets me mute it on my end as well. So, and that was actually Eddie Gray that I muted. Did you want to bring Eddie into the webinar, or is he just listening? Because he was actually.
Oh, is he there?
His mic was on.
Let's see. Hey, Eddie, are you out there?
Here, let me unmute him. Well, let's do this. Let's talk about the 30-day music production workshop. I want to talk about what's included and let everybody know about that. So I'm going to bring up a slide. So the 30-day music production workshop, this is how it works. It starts on August 1st. It's a 30-day workshop where you're going to work one-on-one with Gary for 30 consecutive days. If you want information, I'm going to explain it now, but if you want more information, go to musiclicensingclass.com/30day. So you see this URL at the top of the slide, musiclicensingclass.com/30day, and you can get all the details. But essentially, it's a 30-day long workshop where you work one-on-one with Gary. You touch base twice. So at the beginning of the workshop, you'll submit Gary 2 of your tracks, and Gary will provide specific feedback on your production and things to improve over the course of the workshop. Then at the end of the workshop, you'll touch base again with your new and improved mix, and Gary will give you a sort of a progress report. During the workshop, you'll also get 30 daily production lessons. So throughout the workshop, Gary will email you every day with new production tips and lessons to work on as you're going forward working on your tracks. When you sign up for the workshop, you get our brand new 8-hour-long video course. This course is called Music Production Fundamentals. This is actually going to be released separately on August 1st as well. So if you want to pre-order that, we'll give you details in a second. It's 8 hours long. It's released on August 1st. It's a part of the 30-day workshop. And you also get our 2 previous courses, Mysteries of Mastering Solved and how to produce tracks that will get licensed and make you money. I think in total we have about 12 hours of content specifically related to music production, and specifically related to music production as it relates to licensing. So again, the workshop starts on August 1st. There's just 50 spots available. You can register at this URL. I'll highlight this here for you. musiclicensingclass.com/30-day. So go check that out. While you're checking that out, I'm going to stop this slide. What I thought we'd do, Gary, is let's open up. I'd like to address any questions that people have. I see some questions popping up over here on the right-hand side. Gary, can you see those questions?
Yes, I can.
So we have about 12 minutes left. Let's answer as many questions as we have time to get to. And do you want me just to kind of fire these at you randomly, or do you want to pick questions? Because you can see the same thing I see.
Yeah, I think I can see them. I'll just pick some and then go for it. How's that?
Perfect.
So here's a really good question, and this comes from Mike, Georgia, and it says, is there a fast way to export all of the stems at once in Logic at once? Maybe, it says maybe through exporting all of the bus groups. And it's a good question for everyone, not just people that use Logic. What's happening is, since this has become a very important thing in the industry, all the latest versions of Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, Ableton, etc., the whole industry is moving so that the answer, like for Mike there, is yes. So every one of these DAWs is making it much easier to export stem files all at once. And so that's one of the in detail, I don't want to really, I'd have to, only take that question up if I answered it in detail. But the answer, the general answer, yes. And I go over that in detail in the workshop. So let me see what other questions we have here. So,
and I think he had a second part to the question too.
If you look, if I am producing my own tracks, should I spend the time exporting stems ahead of time, or wait till they ask? Excellent question. When I first got into this, I was so excited about stem files. I was like, just going over the top on it. What I do is there's a two-part answer to this, which is actually very, very critical, and that's a really good question. So when you submit your tracks, you don't have to submit stems, and some people don't even ask you for them. I mean, and some jobs don't require them, just so you know. But to set up your discipline and your workflow in a way where you're creating stem files now will absolutely help your career. And that in itself I can go into a lot of details about, but just know, if you set up your sessions for stem files, it's going to help your career. It's going to help the quality of your tracks, by the way. Mixing this way increases the quality of your tracks, and I can show you how. Like now, when I do EPs or albums or singles that have nothing to do with licensing, just being creative, I set up everything the same way as for licensing because it creates a much better workflow for me and increases the quality of my tracks. So more detail for you, Mike, is that you don't have to send them the stems, but here's what I do. If you go back later and create your stems, you can really lose the flow of your project and details about it. Music licensing success has to do with being detail-oriented, organized, and staying calm, staying fresh. And I show you different ways. That's why I call it music production fundamentals, because there's a lot of false information about how you mix and how you do all the things we do. And that false information, when you get it from different sources, can cause you to mix in a way where you're not calm, where you're kind of feeling stressed and frustrated and you have all this conflicting information. Well, when you're on a flow and you're in there in the project, make your stems now. Make them right there. I then show you how to test those stems. A big part of success for music licensing production has to do with what I call the inspector steps, where you're doing quality control. Huge topic. Couldn't say more, couldn't say too much about it. It's just quality control, being the inspector, huge. So make your stems then. And what I do, I had a student from Russia 2 days ago sent me an email. Last week I told him, when you send your emails out to publishers now, tell them that you do have stems available, and here's a link to those stems if they want it. And he's like, oh, really? Okay, I'll try that. This is a relatively brand new guy to licensing, never had anything placed before. He sent me an email 2 days ago. That was his lesson last week. And he got picked up for an exclusive 8-song deal. And it was after he sent an email that said, hey, I got stem files available. They considered that this is a professional and that he knows what he's doing, and he's probably experienced, which he wasn't. But they go, this guy's probably experienced. He knows what he's doing. He has the stem files ready for us. Okay, so they went with him, and they liked his music. Obviously, his music had to be good, and they took him up. But he said that was the only difference from all his submissions that he was sending, his emails. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and let me jump in really quick, Gary. This is sort of related to a question somebody else asked. Leslie is asking, are companies asking for stems as opposed to instrumental versions now? And the answer is no. But I think you made a really good point, Gary, in that, like, what we're finding, what I'm seeing and what Gary is seeing, is that people that are really, really professional and sort of have all their ducks in a row, people in this business, music supervisors and publishers want to work with those people. So I think if this is something you're aware of, and like you said, Gary, with your client, he just mentioned that he had those available. It's not necessarily that they do this in lieu of instrumental versions. It's just some supervisors like to have these and some don't. But if you let people know, I have an instrumental version, I have stem files, here are my regular mixes, it kind of sets you apart in the sense that you look like someone who really knows what this, how this business works. So it's just one more thing that you should sort of have in your arsenal, ready to go, at the ready.
Absolutely. Good question, Leslie, and excellent answer, Aaron.
Let's see. Do you see any other questions, Gary, on the right-hand column? If you guys have any other questions, feel free to
I see one more. I'm going to take up one more here real quick.
Go for it.
It says, would you need to get each stem mastered? Otherwise, you'd be sending unmastered stems. Excellent question. And the answer to that is, you're going to be asked for, I'll do a quick screenshot actually right now. Let me find list of file categories needed. Here we go. Oh, this is perfect. Perfect way to end off our questions here. Okay. Screen share, file categories needed. Do you see file categories needed by A&E? Do you see that, Aaron?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So here's exactly what you're going to be asked for, and here's to answer the question about mastering. So 7 things that like A&E needs. Number 1 is the full mix, which is 2 minutes or longer. That's your full mix, everything. And then 2, and this is another key thing that's coming up more and more and more in the industry. It used to be asked for once in a while. Now it seems to be asked for all the time, just like stems, which is the underscore. It's just like the full mix, but the main vocal and or instrument, like a solo, are lowered in the mix. They're less loud than they would be in a normal. It actually sounds like kind of like a bad mix where the voice isn't loud enough. And what they'll do is whenever they do use vocal tracks behind dialogue, they don't want to have the vocal track competing with the dialogue. So you actually tuck it in the mix. And so when the person's watching the TV show, they hear the song in the background, but they can't tell that the vocal is not good. It just sounds like a song in the background, but the song itself is not competing with the dialogue. Or if there's a guitar solo, lower the guitar solo. So that's called the underscore. That's an important mix also. Then there's the 4 stems of the full mix. Then you'll be asked for a 60-second, a 30-second, a 15-second, and a 7-second stinger. Now that's stuff that it's I wish we could go into it more, Aaron, but I know we're getting near the end, and you wanted to say a little bit more about the workshop, but it's an excellent question, and there's definitely more to answer on that question, but that'll come up in the workshop.
Good. So we're almost at an hour. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Let's do this. I want to bring up this slide one more time because I want everybody to be aware of this. Gary, do you see this slide? Are you seeing this okay?
Yes, I do. It's what? Yeah, when you talk, I see it.
Okay, good. So I'll keep talking so it doesn't go away. So again, musiclicensingclass.com/30 days. So you'll work one-on-one with Gary for 30 days. 2 half-hour consultations at the beginning and end, and this is really a chance to work with Gary and get a lot of one-on-one work. We've talked about doing this for quite a while, and I'm glad that Gary finally has time in his schedule to do this. So 50 spots available. Register as soon as you can. It's going to start on Monday, August 1st. And if you register now, you'll reserve your spot. And then on Monday, we'll start giving you all the content, including our new 8-hour course, Music Production Fundamentals. If you just want the course, like if you don't want to take the workshop, but you want Gary's new course, Music Production Fundamentals, go to this page as well because there's a link to pre-order that course. It comes out on August 1st as well. So both the course and the workshops start and are released on August 1st. So check that out. I want to thank everybody for attending today. Like I said at the beginning of this was our first live webinar, and so there were a few little technical glitches at the beginning. I'm checking email. I've been checking my email the whole time, and a couple people were sort of confused about how to actually watch the live stream. So next time we do this, we'll make that more obvious. Gary, thank you so much for coming on today. Any closing words of wisdom that you want to leave us with?
Sure. I think that, staying hooked up to howtolicenseyourmusic.com has been the number one most successful thing that I've done for licensing. And I think that the people that are viewing this, and also, just so you know, everyone that's viewing this now, that this will be going up on YouTube, and you can view this entire webinar in the future. And Aaron, do you think you'll send out a link? You think with the?
Yeah, I'll send out the replay link this week, probably
Good.
Wednesday or Thursday.
Good. So yeah, my main word of wisdom to you is to stay hooked up to Aaron and howtolicenseyourmusic.com. It's been just like it was a dream of mine for a long time. Even though I was producing music that other for clients, they were all getting their music licensed. I never took the a concentrated effort and time, though it was a dream always for me to do it. And so in the last year and a half, I started to do it, and that's when I really realized, how important howtolicenseyourmusic.com is. It's been just, within less than a year from when I seriously started, I started getting deals of my own licensed, and not just for other people, although I continue to help. And another thing is, stay hooked up to a mentor or a teacher when it comes to production. If you're not quite there yet, make sure that you have someone to bounce off of that is successful in the field of music licensing, who knows things about stems and who knows about working with supervisors, and stay hooked up that way, because it can be frustrating. You have to have some thick skin. You'll get some rejections at the beginning, and you just have to keep going. It's like Aaron says, these 3 simple words that are so trite, but it kept me going every time I got down, which is, don't give up.
I think that's good advice to leave on. And let me just say one more quick thing, and then we'll wrap this up. Like I've said all along, music production is such a big part of this, and I've tried, I really look at music production as a very separate skill set from songwriting, and it's a separate skill set from marketing. Again, like I said at the beginning of this webinar, there's really 3 skill sets that I think you need to master in order to license your music successfully. One is songwriting, one is production, and one is marketing. So by working with Gary, he's helped me so much in my own tracks. We've had a couple of our tracks now licensed successfully, and so I'm really glad to have him on the team. And I think that's pretty much it. Gary, thanks again for doing this with me today, and thanks for everybody who tuned in. We plan to do a lot more of these live webinars in the future, so we will keep you posted.
Great. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Gary. Take care. And